Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. In today's video, I'm going to be sharing the process for this latest illustration. I'm very happy to say that I was finally able to finish an illustration, first illustration of the year. So the idea for this painting came about, I guess largely in part inspired by upcoming Valentine's Day. I wanted to do something vaguely Valentine's-y, and I also wanted to do something with two figures interacting because I often just focus on one figure, but I really wanted to kind of challenge myself and do two figures, and I think that's why I landed on the whole like angel versus devil kind of a theme. I don't know, I just got the idea of them putting their hands together and forming a heart. I haven't really thought too deeply about what it means, but you can ascribe any kind of meaning that you want on it. I actually had two comps to choose from. I asked my Instagram followers which one they preferred, and I think over 60% voted for this one, so I ended up going with this one instead. I had been kind of struggling finishing illustrations for the past several months, so I really tried to set myself up for success this time, and I drew a pretty tight drawing onto the painting surface. It actually took me quite a while to draw it out, I think mostly because I hadn't done a super tight drawing to refer to, but I'm glad I went in with a tight drawing because it definitely helped the painting process be a bit more streamlined. So I'm putting down the first layer of watercolors, which is the base layer, establishing the hue and tone of all of the elements. So I intended on painting this in mostly watercolors. Spoiler alert, I did not end up sticking to just watercolors. I definitely ended up bringing in other mediums. For the colors, I did a few watercolor comps, and they were done with a bit more of a muted palette. And then I did one digitally on Procreate, and that one had a bit more saturated colors and more of a colorful kind of a look. And I really didn't have a very strong vision of what the colors were going to be for this piece, or even the lighting scenario. But the colors in the digital comp did appeal to me more. I think I really wanted to paint with a bright red color as a nod to Valentine's Day, so I think I just decided to go ahead with the digital comp for the colors. Lately with illustrations, I've been trying to work in a more limited palette. So I made the devil character's color red and the skin color pink, and the angel's colors purple, or like a mauvey purple for like the hat and the gloves, so the accessories, and then the skin more of a cool purple. And as I was painting the shadows, I made the shadows purple as well, so that that shadow color will kind of harmonize the two characters together and make them look like they exist in the same environment. Again, I just didn't have a clear idea what I wanted the colors to be, but I wanted to assign a very limited palette. And I did wonder, after having gone in with these colors, maybe if I should have made both characters the same colors for an even more limited palette look, or if I should have done like a yin and yang kind of a thing and made the devil opposite to the angel, or vice versa. So one of their skin colors would be the color of the accessories of the other character or something like that. I'm wondering if maybe that would have been a bit more striking in the end. I did struggle a little bit with my decision here. Sometimes I have a very clear idea of what I want the colors to be, and then sometimes I really don't, and in this case I really didn't, even though I was using Valentine's Day as inspo. And because of that, I think the color that I knew I wanted was red, but there are different variations of red, right? Like I could have gone a very deep, dark kind of burgundy red, which is what I did in my watercolor color comps. But I ended up going with like this bright punchy red, which I don't paint with very often, so I think partly I kind of wanted to challenge myself as well. Is it just me, or is painting in purple in watercolors really challenging? To get that purple color for the angel character, I used this cobalt violet from Turner's Artist Watercolor, and it is by far the worst watercolor paint I have ever used. Supposedly it is artist grade quality, but I can tell there's a lot of filler in there. It just feels really gunky when I use it, and it doesn't flow or dry very well. And it has a lot of like chunks in it. So I definitely need to find another paint that produces this kind of color, because I was reminded that I really hate this paint, and that's probably why I never really use it. Yeah, but I find purple, the color purple is pretty hard all across media. Like, I'm always lamenting that I don't have enough purple color pencils, enough variety of hues of purple, especially lacking in the bright purple category. It's probably a limitation with the pigments that are available. Maybe it's not like super light fast to have a very bright purple color. But yeah, especially with color pencils, I think, for me anyway, I feel like it's hard to reproduce like a very bright kind of pastel-y purple color. Now that I have filled in the characters, it was time to address the background. I wanted the background to have this kind of tie-dye look of all these different pastel-y colors melding into one another. So I made sure that the area I was working in was sufficiently wet so that when I laid the colors down, it wasn't going to create a hard edge. It would just kind of seamlessly blend into one another. I tried to vary up the pools of colors so that you're seeing a bunch of different colors in an area, but try to predominantly keep the background kind of a yellowish greenish tone, because that's how I had it in the color comp. And while I was using a lot of colors, I was careful not to mix all the colors together, because then you wouldn't get the separate pools of colors and they would all just like mix into one color, which would probably be brown. So it was a delicate balance of like keeping the paper just wet enough but not too wet, so that the beads of like paint wouldn't all just like blend and form into one mass and dry into one color. I think it worked out in the end. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I added some splatters to also create a little bit more interest and texture. So yeah, I am fairly satisfied with how the background came out, at least at this point. I've been trying to get better at laying down these initial washes of watercolor, because I have learned over the years of painting in watercolor that the more you go over watercolor, the more muddy the color gets, the more texture you end up accumulating. I think I realized that trying to get the right value in the hue of the color that you're after, trying to establish that in one shot, in one layer, is probably the best way to go, instead of slowly building up with multiple layers, though that is my tendency to work. I've been trying to figure out why I struggle with watercolor paintings, and I think that is part of the reason. I'm a big fan of Little Thunder, and when I watch her painting process videos for watercolors, the way she works with extreme precision, and I feel like she doesn't do a ton of layers in her watercolor pieces, and she fills in huge shapes and she doesn't dilute her colors as much as I do. I tend to dilute a lot of my colors because I think I'm just too scared to go in as boldly, but she definitely goes in very bold, and I'm beginning to realize that that is probably the way to go, especially with areas where you know what the color is going to be, so you don't need to do a lot of like build up and layering to achieve it. So now I'm going in with a second pass with the watercolors and rendering out the features, rendering the face, rendering the arms and legs and the hands. So adding another layer of detail onto the first pass. And I actually really enjoy this stage in the watercolor painting process. And it helped that the drawing was really tight, so I didn't have to figure anything out. I was really just following the drawing. As you know, as a painter, I really love rendering. So this is like my favorite part of the process, especially with watercolors, because I've already established the initial base color. So I'm just working off of what I've already established and basically darkening, working from light to dark to model the form. Yeah, it's really fun, and it's like a really zen part of the process for me, because this is when the face comes to life. This is when I feel like the arms and the legs look more army and leggy. You can actually see the muscle definition, you can see the little bit of deltoid, you can see a little bit of the like brachialis muscle, you can see a little bit of the back of the thigh muscle, and a little sliver of the knee, a little rendering like that. I absolutely just love to do, whether in paint or pencil or pen. So as frustrating as I find watercolor painting to be, I realize that I really love this part of watercolor painting. So I want to definitely find a way where I can eliminate the frustrating parts of watercolor, but maintain the part that I love, which is the zen kind of rendering part. And I really like how it looks as well, the rendering in watercolor. I do feel like it has that kind of old school golden age illustration kind of a look to it. I really do love the look of just watercolors, so I want to get better at preserving the mostly watercolor areas and leaving them be, and not feeling like I have to tidy up the edges or anything like that. Having some of those unintended hard edges, I think I need to get better at just like leaving them and not feel like I have to have a smooth gradient between all the colors. So rendering the angel character's face doesn't go very well, so I don't really show much of it, since I'm gonna use color pencils to go over top of most of it later on. But again, I'm gonna blame that purple paint that I use, the Turner's Artist Watercolor Cobalt Violet. I'm gonna blame that paint for any trouble I had on this character, because I felt like most of the time I was just trying to cover up the initial pass because it was just so splotchy, and it just didn't behave in the typical way I would expect better watercolor pigments to behave. So So here you'll see me do a technique that I sometimes incorporate into my watercolor pieces, and that is drawing an outline. And specifically, the outline is mostly just concentrated on the outer silhouette of the like area that I'm working on. And I've been enjoying using this technique as a way to minimize the rendering that I do. As much as I do love the rendering, I recognize that I can't render everything to 100%. That can result in an overworked look, which is what I want to avoid. So using an outline on the outside and then keeping the rendering on the inside of the form much simpler is a great way to make an area look finished, but not like overly rendered. So as you can see, especially with the back legs of the two characters, I used the outline technique and I kept the rendering extremely simple on the inside of the form. And on top of that, I also put most of the legs in that like purple shadow color so that it creates a separation from the leg that is in front. And I did that with the devil's wing as well. I really like using this effect to incorporate areas that are more simplified. Because I love really going ham with the rendering, I find that I need areas of rest like this in my picture so that not all the elements in the piece are fighting for your attention. There's areas of greater interest and detail, and then there's areas of rest. Once I felt I had done all I could with watercolors and I just didn't really know where else to go, I didn't want to accidentally overwork an area. I didn't want to undo some of the rendering I've done by going over it again with watercolors. This is when I accepted defeat and I brought in my color pencils. Especially with the angel character's face, I really wasn't happy with the rendering I did with the watercolors, so I knew I was going to bring in the color pencils to go over top and fix it. And because of that godforsaken Cobalt Violet by Turner Artist watercolor, I basically had to go over the angel character quite a bit with the color pencils to kind of even out the patchiness and color correct. But I tried my best. I try my best to not go in with the color pencils all over the piece. Again, because I wanted to preserve some of the spontaneous, fresh look of the watercolor. I used a lot of it in the shoes because I also wasn't happy with the rendering there as well that I did in watercolor. I use the color pencils to render the hands forming the heart a little bit better. I actually really wasn't too sure how I would handle this part of the illustration, even though I feel like this is kind of the like gag of the illustration and I really should have given it more thought. But yeah, I wasn't sure whether I wanted it to look a bit more subtle or whether I was going to make it a bit more obvious. So I thought the easier route would be to make the heart a bit more obvious and make it a little bit more on the nose. So that's why I decided to make a little glowing heart around the hands. So I always arrive at this point in my illustrations, usually watercolor illustrations, where I've done all that I could with watercolors. I even brought in color pencils and fixed some of the things that were bothering me, but I really don't know where to go from this point. But the piece doesn't quite feel finished yet, and I really don't know what more to do. And this is the point where I feel quite frustrated, and I feel that dreaded, like, oh no, like, am I going to have to abandon this piece too? Like, those kinds of fears and thoughts creeping in. I hummed and hawed a little bit on what to do. I was like, should I make the background a little bit darker so that the characters pop out a little bit more? Or should I make the characters a little bit darker and keep the background lighter so that the characters are silhouetted against a lighter background? And as much as I wanted to like not tamper with the background because it was a little bit hard to achieve all those nicely blended pastel-y colors, I knew that going into the background would potentially make muddier colors and create a lot of unwanted texture. I did feel that the background felt a little bit pale and it needed to be a little bit darker against the characters. So made the tough decision to bring back in the watercolors and go back into the background to darken some of the areas, especially around the characters. I think my lesson there is had I known exactly how I wanted the values, then going into the background in the first pass, I could have adjusted the value of my paints better and gotten it closer on the first try instead of using a second layer going over top of the first layer, because going in with a second layer, I'm not able to use the exact same color to go over the first layer of colors. So I'm unfortunately mixing a lot of colors by doing so and potentially dulling the colors down, creating a lot of brown and grays. So it wasn't like the ideal choice. I wish I had been able to go in with just one pass and then let it be. But yeah, I find that I run into this issue with watercolors a lot. So going forward, I do want to get better with my planning and have a clearer idea of what I want in terms of the colors, so that with these kinds of areas like the background, I can just go in once, and that way I can achieve the purest color, because sometimes I really want like a really bright pastel-y color. Certain colors, especially the brighter, more pastel-y colors, they have to be achieved with surgical precision. And so yeah, I'm trying to be more mindful of that going forward, and I think having a better, more thought out plan should help, so that I'm not constantly going over the same areas over and over again. When I painted the hands with watercolors, I did leave out a little heart shape rim on the inside edge of the hearts. I left a bit of the paper showing because I knew I wanted to create a kind of glow for the heart, but it didn't really feel bright enough because I think the painting, like the watercolor, was kind of encroaching on that white outline, and I think I wanted to make that heart outline a bit more obvious and a bit more on the nose. So I actually end up going over it with acrylics and using white acrylic to strengthen that heart shape and make it actually more exaggerated into a heart shape. I don't know, how do you guys feel about this decision? Should I have left the hands more hand-shaped, or does it help the piece that I have made the heart into a more obvious heart shape? Because before doing that, I felt like it wasn't quite reading as a heart, but maybe it wasn't really necessary. I don't know. I don't really know how I feel about it. And now it finally came time for me to stop stalling and address the background elements. The background elements, I kind of had a feeling that I would be bringing in alcohol markers to draw them in instead of using color pencils or watercolors, because color pencils would create too much texture and watercolors wouldn't produce a kind of bright enough color, I don't think. So even though I feel like mixing watercolors and markers. I don't really know how kosher that is. In all of the color comps that I did, I drew in these squiggly lines in the background. I think I wanted to make the background look a little bit chaotic, perhaps to echo the kind of emotional state of the two characters. But also I just wanted to have fun with the shapes and kind of layering on these shapes together. I didn't know exactly what the shapes looked like, but I knew I wanted to draw in those squiggles. And I think I could have used color pencils, but I didn't really want all the associated texture with it, and I just knew it would be a lot faster with markers, so that's why I ended up going with markers. So yeah. And I go in with a marker and carefully drew in the background elements one by one, starting with the squiggles in the teal color. I wanted these elements to look haphazardly drawn, for it to have this like childlike kind of quality to it. But I was also cognizant of the fact that I am using markers, which is permanent. So I was very careful about drawing them out. And I thought very hard between drawing each one about the placement, and I would practice the motion of drawing it so I would get the shape that I wanted. Balance is very important to me, feeling like the elements in a piece are balanced. And so even though I wanted that haphazard, chaotic look, I was actually very thoughtful and methodical about it. And this approach is the same approach that I used for the background in the piece that I titled Ghosts in Transit. I have a YouTube video of that process where I have a watercolor established background and I draw these graphic shapes over top with markers. And yeah, I worry that I may be resorting to the same kind of shapes or same kind of just resolving the background in a very similar way in all my illustrations. But then again, I think sometimes I just need to get over myself of having that fear of like, oh, like repeating myself too much, because why do I feel like I have to reinvent myself with every piece? Even though I have that gnawing thought in the back of my head, I think I would still rather have more pieces that are somewhat similar in vein than have fewer pieces at the end of the day, you know? So I'm really trying to get over that and trying to get over putting so much pressure on myself to constantly reinvent the wheel, because I think it's totally fair to repeat some design elements and repeat certain processes in your painting. I think honestly I should probably do more of that to really figure out the kind of look that I'm after, instead of just trying it once and being like, well, I've done it, let's try to figure out another thing for the next illustration. But I find that I hold on to these kinds of thoughts often, and it's probably what gets in the way of the process sometimes. So I'm trying to let go of that, trying to not take myself so seriously and just allow myself to honestly make the painting as easy as I can so that I can get through it and then get on to the next one. I need to get it out of my system. I need to see it on paper finished instead of it being unfinished and living just like inside my head and floating around in my head forever. I need to get it out there in order to provide context for the next pieces. So I really just need to get over myself, honestly, and just finish the painting in the way that really compels me to in that moment, even if that means resorting to a certain process that I had used on a previous illustration. I'm returning to the hands once again to really make the heart gag of the piece a bit more clear. Because I went in with the acrylics, it did make it a little bit harder to go over top with colored pencils. I wasn't 100% happy with it in the end, but I felt it was good enough for the piece to move on. And with that, I was ready to call this piece finished. And it was actually really satisfying to sign it at the bottom right corner to really mark the completion, you know, so that I am not gonna fiddle around with it anymore, and I can add this to the collection of finished illustrations, and I am moving on to the next thing. So let me know what you guys think of this piece. I admit that going into it, I didn't have like a super strong, clear vision of the colors and the lighting and basically how the whole piece was going to come together. I only really had a very clear idea of the drawing. It was kind of up in the air, and I think I could have gone in a number of different directions, but I really just wanted to challenge myself to, this is gonna sound funny, but I wanted to challenge myself to make the illustration a more straightforward and easier process for me, so that I can keep progressing and not spend too long on each part of the process, and keep myself from getting stuck in any part of the process, because that's when I feel my like morale goes down, and that's when I usually end up abandoning a piece. So yeah, sounds funny, but I challenged myself to make an easier illustration for myself, and I think I managed to do that in the end. I am pleased with how it looks, though it doesn't feel like the strongest execution of a concept. I'm pleased enough with it. I think it looks appealing enough. I like the colors, I like the shapes, I like how the figures look. It like tickles me enough to be pleased enough with this illustration. I do feel really excited to figure out what my next illustration is gonna be, and I do feel a bit more confident in tackling that one, and this is the way I want to feel after every illustration. I want to feel a little bit more confident after each one. So yeah, I think that is it for today's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!